I won't lie. This tournament was super cool. I absolutely enjoyed watching the end of it. Nick Taylor and Tommy Fleetwood tied, went into a playoff, and it took 4 playoff holes for Nick Taylor to win. He's the first Canadian to win in the last 69 years, and I believe he's the first Canadian-born winner in the last 100 years, 100 and some years. So finally, Canada got one. That's awesome. Like, I'm a Minnesota fan. Like, I was born and raised in Minnesota. I have not seen a championship team. I was alive when the Minnesota Twins won both World Series. However, I was just born when they won the first one. So the second one, I was like 4 years old. I can't say I remember it, but I do remember kind of the, gosh, I forget what our little hankies were called with the Twins. I know we had those. I remember cheering when the game was going on, but I don't remember what they're called. Homer hankies, I think, maybe. Anyways, being a Minnesota sports fan, it's like, you know, when Joe Mauer was drafted by the Twins, it's like, yes, a hometown kid could help win a championship for Minnesota. That's a Minnesota dream. You know, one of your own being on a championship team for Minnesota. And then you had Adam Thielen for the Minnesota Vikings. He had a couple good years on the Minnesota Vikings that they kind of went into the playoffs, a little deep in the playoffs, and then obviously it didn't work out. But that was another one of those, like, oh man, a Minnesota born and raised guy that could help. So, hey, when I saw Nick Taylor drain his 72-foot eagle putt, I mean, I yelled out loud. I thought it was awesome. Like, I was hoping for Canada's own to make it happen. And Nick Taylor, of all people, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So especially when he started out the tournament at +3 after round 1. The cut ended up being -1. He shot 5 under his second round to make the cut, and then proceeded to shoot 8 under, 8 under and 7 under or something like that. It was insane. It was insane. Heartbreak for Tommy Fleetwood. He doesn't get a win, but awesome. Super awesome for Nick Taylor. Like, that was so cool. So cool. When I go over these reviews, I kind of just want to stick to the sweet spot process, but I thought this was one of those weeks where I wanted to do a review of what happened in the tournament. Because it's unique. And it's one of the coolest things I've seen in golf. Like, Tiger winning the 2019 Masters might be the most memorable moment in golf for me. Because, I mean, I started paying attention to golf, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, something? Oh, no. It'd be 20 years ago. Within those 20 years, it's all been Tiger. It's all been Tiger dominated. You know, Torrey Pines was awesome. The U.S. Open, where he basically was perfect. When he shot crazy at the Masters. Those are all distant memories. So 2019 Masters for me, it was the most memorable. And it's probably something I will remember to the day I die. This was one of the coolest. This is up there with a lot of those moments, because it just, the atmosphere, the way he did it, it was awesome. It was so cool. So I loved watching the end of it. I that's all that I got to watch, by the way, in the weekend. I only watched like the final minutes, because I was busy doing other things. So very cool. Now, when it comes to the sweet spot process, I always come to the bucket system portion here. Let me hide some of this information. We don't need to see this, but we do need to see what's on the screen right here. I build this every single week to show me, did my projections hit their mark? And I have my projections over here. If you've never seen these before, let me explain them really quick. In this column, I have my minimum projections. In this column, I have my maximum projections. And each row is an individual bucket. So I have a stat. You know, we have our last year buckets, and they're numbered 1 through 6. So last year bucket 1 is what I would call it. There's basically this is a range, a definition. I'm trying to think of the actual word that I want to call it. But this is the range that qualifies what last year bucket 1 is. At golfers that finish inside the top 20 the year before. So those are last year bucket 1 golfers. For my projections, you see it's 2.01 to 3.35. Now, I always round down with this number, and I always round up with this number. So this would actually be 2 to 4 golfers. Now, I added a piece that I have not yet committed to that includes all of the sweet spot scores. that are included in my model, and that creates a new projection over here. So you can see 2.91 is the new max projection. Now, just to add another layer to this, and hopefully I don't, lose you guys here, I always want a 2-point buffer between the max projection and the min projection. So this conservative, I call this a conservative projection, but this isn't including the sweet spot ranks. Because this is not over 3, this rounds up to 3, and I want a 2-point buffer. So the minimum will always be 1 in this scenario. So although the bucket over here reads 2 to 4, because it's not a super high quality bucket with the sweet spot score, I drop the minimum down to 1. But I actually do keep this maximum projection over here. So the new, and I know this is kind of messy, the new projection is 1 to 4. And let me go ahead and pull up that optimizer again. When I write this into my optimizer, you can see last year 1, I had 1 to 4. That's, when you include the buckets. So just to show you that I am absolutely truthful with this when I go through it. That's what I see. That's how I view the bucket system. Now, when it comes to these projections, so each one of these projections all the way down, including the max projection over here, I have this success column. Success will count how many golfers were inside the top 10, which you can see right here under this year's totals. How many were inside the top 10? Does that number fall inside my projections? If yes, then boom, it's a success. If not, did the optimal lineup, the number inside the optimal lineup, fall inside these projections? If yes, then perfect. If not, then no. And you can see down here, I have one bucket that was a no. Every other bucket was a success. So 35 out of 36 buckets were successful. The only bucket that was not was the 7K range. But guess what? There were 6 inside the top 10. There were 4 in the optimal lineup. 4. You're not going to get there. And I'll show you what the optimal lineup left a lot of money on the table. You're not going to get there. However, when we do follow the sweet spot optimal, I only used 3. That would fit inside the projections. Therefore, the buckets would be 100% successful. So let's go ahead and take a look at the optimal, the GPP winning lineup, as well as the sweet spot optimal. If the sweet spot optimal beats out the, actually, let me back up. There's one more piece to add because that goes into the sweet spot optimal. But keep this on pause for now. Going to 2023, or the results here, I'm going to go ahead and put a filter on this. I'm going to actually hide this because we don't need it. The whole sweet spot process. So we just went over the bucket system, and I just showed you 35 out of 36 buckets were successful. The second piece, or the last piece, I should say, are the marquee tee times. So what I do every single week is I add up the sweet spot ranks, and I rank order them from top to bottom. So I look at each group, I add their ranks, and I compare them to all the other groups that are in the field. And then that's how I create my ranking, or my marquee tee times. I always create 9 because unfortunately my optimizer only can have 9 with all the other criteria that I have in there. I can't put any more marquee tee times. I'd only want 10 if I'm being honest. So 9 is just fine. Out of the 9 marquee tee times, I tell you select 2 to 4. 2 to 4 groups and only 1 golfer from each of those groups. Put those and anchor around them, or anchor those golfers in your lineup. So right away, what we can tell, these little black tick marks that you see on the screen, those are golfers in the optimal lineup. Nick Taylor, Aaron Rai, Tyrrell Hatton, and Brandon Wu. 4 golfers in the marquee tee times. Boom. 100% success when it comes to the marquee tee times. Don't even have to talk about any more of those. But you can also see I have some green highlights on the salaries. These indicate the sweet spot optimal, so they're not the same. So you can kind of already paint a picture of, okay, so the optimal lineup isn't the sweet spot optimal, so something's going on there. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the SweetSpot optimal or the optimal and everything else, GPP and SweetSpot are. Your optimal left $1,600 on the table. That's impossible. You're never going to build a lineup that does that. It scored 672 points. So the golfers in that optimal were Tyrrell Hatton at $10,200, $8,100 Nick Taylor, $7,600 Aaron Rai, $7,100 CT Pan, $7,900 Eric Cole, and $7,500 Brennan Wu. 4 7K golfers, 1 10K golfer, and 1 8K golfer. This equals 48,400. Again, that's pretty impossible to get to. Your GPP winning lineup for the $5 drive the green scored 652.5 points. That is within 20 points of the optimal. That's pretty darn good. It left $500 on the table, and it used Taylor, Fleetwood, Hatton, CT Pan, who was one of my favorite golfers this week, Mark Hubbard, and Doug Yim. Pretty darn good right there. Again, that scored 652.5 points. So if the buckets were 35 out of 36 correct, and 4 golfers in the optimal lineup were in the Marquee Tee Times and not playing together, that means SweetSpot Optimal had to have been successful, right? Wrong. I think a lot of it, so the SweetSpot Optimal scored 635.5, and it used Hatton, Nick Taylor, Rai, CT Pan, Will Gordon, and scrolling down to Shane Lowry. Because what I had in the Optima or in the bucket system was to select at least one 9K golfer. Well, when you look at the top of the leaderboard, if I go back to this page, our 9K golfer finished second place. That was Tommy Fleetwood. He was actually in group 12. So too was Nick Taylor, who finished in first place. So right away, those 2 golfers played together Thursday, Friday, and the SweetSpot rules say can't pair up golfers together, or you shouldn't, because the likelihood of them being in the optimal lineup together, very unlikely. I have analyzed this for the last 2 years. I've noticed that rarely happens. So I play the numbers. And that's kind of why I say it that way. So that was our $9,600 golfer inside the top 10, but so too was Justin Rose. He was in group 8. The buckets, when you put them all together and you're trying to find the golfers, it is very hard and difficult to pair up Nick Taylor with Justin Rose, and especially when I was telling you wanted to play a 10K golfer. So like Tyrrell Hatton, Rose, and Nick Taylor, you just couldn't provide, or you couldn't put enough golfers together in the buckets that you wanted in the optimizer to create a lineup that did any better than what I showed you. So 635 was the highest I could get with any combination of golfers. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that a lot of these golfers were playing together. Not every one of them were in the optimal lineup. And also Rory McIlroy kind of crapping the bed on Sunday's round. He shot 72. See everyone else inside the top 8, no one shot worse than 71. So Rory had a really bad Sunday. Had he won this tournament or would have been inside the top 3 or top 2, I would have done really well this week. We actually had 2 viewers of this channel, or really participants, Ryan Henson and Nick. Guru Nick is what he goes off of. You can see that on DK. Both of those guys had really good weeks. Ryan won the Drive the Green. Nick won a GPP that got him $15,000. And both of them used CT Pan, which we were on quite heavily during the strategy video. I tried going back and seeing if we built any of those lineups for them, and I didn't notice that we did. But they did have CT Pan in there quite a bit. I believe both played Tyrrell Hatton and Justin Rose, I think. So congratulations to those guys for winning the oodles and oodles of money that they did. That covers the review for the RBC Canadian Open.